Welcome to Black Hat Briefings, held November 21st through the 22nd, 2001 in Amsterdam. This is videotape number 13, Web Vulnerability and SQL Injection Countermeasure.
You want me to leave these doors open? Are you guys hot? I want you all to be comfortable. Yes? No? Yeah? Okay. And I suppose it'd be good to figure out how to... Oh no. While this guy's rebooting, hopefully it'll pop up here in a minute. Well, we've almost made it through Black Hat, hey? My name is Tim Mullen. I work for a company called Anchor IS. We design secure accounting software. It's a Microsoft shop, so everything's based on Windows 2000, SQL Server 2000 for the infrastructure, the servers, and as well as the client system. We have a number of different client packages that we run, both with VB, C++, and even Microsoft Access front ends, depending on the application. What we're going to be talking, oh good. I also work, if you want to call it work, or started a little co-op called the Hammer of God, and I go under the guise of Thor there. So some of you guys I may have even talked to on websites or via lists and stuff like that. So that's kind of who I am. So what we're going to be talking about today is about web vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities that we introduce into our own systems by means of poor design, and vulnerabilities that other people introduce into their systems by poor design. And we're going to discuss not only what these vulnerabilities are, and identify them and kind of get some examples of them. But we're also going to talk about, in my mind, what's more important, which is how to protect ourselves from them. Who saw the Foundstone hack yesterday with JD and Glaze? Yeah. So they used some different methods, one of which was SQL injection, to penetrate a system and perform what they called one-way hacking. And we're going to talk about some of that stuff too. And kind of how what we're going to do today would stop them from being able to do what they did, outside of applying the patch, right? So, as I try to think of something funny to say while my computer boots up, and I'm failing, let's kind of outline what we're going to talk about. So this guy, I guess this is our last session. Is there one after this? Yeah. But we're close to it. Well, how has it been so far? Everyone enjoying it? Yes, no, maybe? Yeah, kind of? It's always a lot of fun for us. Sometimes too much fun. Amsterdam is certainly a place where you can engage in too much fun. Anyway, I digress. We're splitting this guy into two parts. Part one is where we're going to kind of outline what your standard vulnerabilities are. Issues with client-side, HTML, URL manipulation, SQL injection, some of your standard stuff. This is going to be a real quick, down and dirty, condensed version of the training that we did earlier in the week. And we're going to talk about countermeasures from a development side. What you as system administrators, you as web developers can do to keep this stuff from happening. Specifically, input validation, data sanitation, typing of the variables, using different command objects. I'm getting hit every time I walk around by those things. And then after our short break, We're going to go live on the internet, and that's another reason I want both doors open, and show you some issues with, there's a website out there now that is very, very highly utilized by people all around the world, and it's just got some issues with it. And I really want to show, the reason I'm going to show you this, I hadn't shown anybody this before publicly. We've been kind of using this theoretically to our advantage here for a little while. And I just want to illustrate some of the bigger problems that can come around from some simple issues. And then if we have time, and I'm sure we will, I'm going to demo a little Linux app that I wrote called Squeal. It's a rogue SQL server that's designed to accept NTLM credentials from a client, and we'll go over how all that stuff works then. Okay, so part one. What we're going to do is I've got a little web application that we whipped up called www.realestate.com. And I'm sure that is a real site. But I took the name anyway because it was easy to remember. So I guess this is where I give you the little disclaimer that all persons and places and depictions here are entirely fictional, and any reference to real life is completely coincidental. So the purpose of realestate.com in Succafool, California, is to take some user input and to spit back out a record set, right? Your standard data-enabled application, where what we want to do is basically let the users provide us with a little bit of data. We're going to look at what it is that they want, and we're going to spit some data back. Specifically, this is being done on a with the flavor towards Windows 2000, IIS 5, and SQL Server 2000. Now, as you saw, I booted up Whistler. Whistler is a bit different. There are some options in Whistler that we'll go over a little bit because I think they're interesting. But for the most part, the things that we're talking about, actually, in its entirety, the things that we're talking about are applicable directly to IIS 5. So the fact that I'm running Whistler up here doesn't matter, unless it crashes on us mid. But it did well. I see a couple of guys from the class that we did, and it did fine during the class. So far Whistler is a winner. I'm just going to go up here and say search listings. Actually looks like a real website, doesn't it? Input forms are clearly one of the most highly utilized method of posting data into an application like an ASP form and then performing server-side functions to retrieve data, right? I almost say yeah, because I've been talking to all the European guys. I'm like, yeah. So what this allows us to do is select an area flavored towards the Tahoe area, where I happen to be from, and allows us to select a price, or a type rather, being residential, what have you, and a price. So let's just select the Truckee area and hit search. Oh, yes. Yeah, SA. Yeah, oops. Like I said, design issues. We're going to talk about that in a second. I want to set this guy back into, I'll just do it from here, because it hurts my neck to twist around over there. My SQL Server was left in Windows NT integrated mode, and that's the wrong computer, which is the preferred way, and we'll kind of talk about that. But let me switch it back so as I can have my horrible code properly demoed. So So I'm just using remote desktop to establish a session with this guy over here, so as I don't get a crick in my neck and you see the back of my head while I attempt to change the mode that SQL Server is in. Oop, wrong place. That's right, I blew it away. It's all coming back to me now. So I'm going over to SIF, which is the name of that box. And I'm going to change it back to SQL Server in Windows. We go into this extensively in the class, so I guess now is as good a time as any to talk about it here. I really wasn't going to get too much into it in the short time we have. But SQL Server has basically two modes of authentication. Who's using SQL Server for their back-end data source for web-driven applications now? Anyone? Anyone? How many of you guys are actually using strictly NT authentication? One guy, or the rest of the folks just aren't going to? Yep. That's very, very common. It's actually harder for you to administer your web apps like that?
Well, it depends, of course, but it's more secure.
Absolutely. And now let me get back to this real quick, and I'll just kind of, I'll move on. Let me Okay. So just to give you a real quick hint of what happened, with the two modes of SQL Server authentication, the most widely used mode, which is also the most insecure mode, in my humble opinion, is the mixed mode, where you have the ability of validating user credentials against the NT user domain account, or you populate SQL Server itself with its own logons that are independent of any other logon. In other words, you can just create X number of logons in SQL Server, give those people usernames and passwords to access the data, and then you can still apply permissions and all of that stuff, but the authentication engine is within SQL Server itself. The reason there's an issue with that is once we use SQL Server authentication, we step outside of the controls that the NT domain structure allows us to have. We step outside of strong password requirements and validation. We step outside of user lockout parameters, where once they enter their password 3 times, we lock them out. We step outside of making them change their password X number of days or something like that. None of the really more powerful account management features in Windows NT are available to us whenever we choose SQL Server mode. There's also an account who saw in the code the reference to SA. SA is always SA is always a valid user for SQL Server. We know the SA account exists. So it's very easy, and there are several of them out there, tools to brute force the SA account. Just sit there, connect to 1433, and hammer away at that guy. So there are some issues. By far, the best way is to use NT-only authentication. However, you introduce a level of complexity or a level of administration that requires you to create user accounts in the domain structure for these people to access the data. Now, in a simple web app like this, where I'm treating everyone as the same person, then all we have to do is create a single user on the domain and have that guy be the user that we use to access the data source. But what we're finding is that our customers are demanding more of us as vendors. They're demanding the ability to be able to see their billing information online. They're demanding the ability to be able to change information online, look up invoices, see quotes. They want to post data, receive data. They almost want us to be, in some cases, a branch of their own IT department. They want to be able to automate processes, because if we are providing them with whatever data is, and this is in general, not just our company, if you're selling widgets, your distributors might want to be able to do all this stuff. So they're going to make these demands, and we're going to meet those demands for them. When you have circumstances with multiple people coming into your site, well, we have an issue with validation, right? So the NT domain structure, the NT authenticated mode rather, allows us to put permissions on certain directories, permissions on certain applications that are validated, and whenever that person logs in via the web, they're mapped to the NT user account, and then all their NTFS permissions get maintained. We get all of those nice controls. We can make them change their password. We get really robust controls and audits for things like that. So that's why I recommend to use integrated mode, like the gentleman. I'm sorry, Windows only. They kind of changed the terminology on us from 7 to 2000. The one thing that I want you to remember is when you're installing SQL Server and you choose NT only mode and you move on, always go back into Enterprise Manager and change the SA password, even though the SA account is not being used. Because when a developer does something like I just did, which you should never have developers touching your production systems, right? You have armed guards with sticks and keeping them away. They turn that off just for a moment to test something, never go back to change it, and all of a sudden SA is blank. So you basically get local system on the box with a blank password. SA blank passwords are actually sickeningly, if that's an appropriate word, quite common. Anybody heard about the new SQL worm that's going around? Yeah, a little worm that is looking to exploit blank or weak SQL passwords, SA with a blank, SA with SA, stuff like that. Okay, so now that we've got this guy up, let's just talk a minute about what's happening here. I selected a property type, told it to search, and what happens is it's gone into my SQL Server and retrieved all the areas that were trucky, and that's area equals 1. And you'll see a resultant SQL string up there. Now obviously you don't do that. I'm just showing you this. So as you can see, as we're going to move through some demos here, and I just want you to see kind of what happens up there. Well, let's look at our form. Let's look at what gets posted into the get data ASP file to produce this. So we're going to look at the form, and then we're going to look at the source. User form. Did I say to edit it? Or did I just open it? Okay. Actually, let me open this guy and nobody laugh at me. Just, I see you follow instructions well.
I'm in Amsterdam.
Yeah. Nobody laugh at me. I'm going to open it in the front page. The reason being is front page is easy to get hold of, and if I show you this and you get used to it, you don't have to go purchase .NET Development Suite for Visual Studio. I don't even know how much it costs, but it's got to be expensive.
It's free if you have Select CDs.
It's free for me. If you have what?
Select CDs.
Oh, Select
Of
CDs.
course, it's not free.
Yeah, nothing's ever free, is it?
Can be moved out for them.
All right, so let's just look at user form. That's this guy. Standard stuff. I actually have some little neat preload image JavaScript going on. So as whenever you, wow, we're losing them. They're dropping like flies. No, it's okay.
Crashing like Windows.
That's actually funny. So let's just come down here. This is where really the form stuff happens here. This is all standard for you guys, right? You see all of this all the time. Where we go in and we want to give them a select. And right now the get data ASP file is broken. We're still developing this application, right? So you see what I've done up here is I have the name of area. That's the variable name. And then my select statement, my option values here are 1 through 6, and then the text representation of that. Whoa. Yeah. No. Can I? In front page?
Format font?
In front page? I don't know. You know, let me do it in something that I know how to do, rather than wasting your valuable time. I'll just dump it into Word real quick. I can make it real big. We lose some of the colors. Is that a little better? Really all that we've did, I was born in the South, so sometimes it just jumps up on me and I can't escape it. What we have done is, with our form here, we've just created a variable called area, and then here are the option values. Whenever I hit submit, we just post this guy based on the text that I wasn't smart enough to copy and paste into here. Yeah, I have done this before. It's not obvious as that may be. So all we're doing is we're posting this into getData.asp. Simple stuff. Well, now let's look at getData.asp because that's really where the work is being done. That's a standard HTML file. The user gets to see everything, right? If they're back to this file, they can just go to View Source and see the whole thing, every piece of code. I think people forget this sometimes. People input hidden variables in their client-side HTML, thinking the word hidden means that it's hidden, which it doesn't, right? All it does is say hidden equals. In fact, it's really nice to search for that in your text. Let's find hidden variables that they're passing from the client HTML into the ASP file and acting on it somehow, using it for validation in some cases. Whenever I design an HTML page for client X, I've seen people put client equals X in a hidden variable. So as whenever it gets posted to the site, the server knows, oh, this is client X, as if we can't change that to client Y, which we do all the time. So anyway, let's take a look at the ASP, which is a bit different. ASP, or we have ASP developers, we said? Oh. Wow. So I'll spend a little more time on this then. That's good, actually. We have PHP developers. Okay. Pretty much the same. But here's what's going to happen is lucky I didn't start drinking this morning or that would have been bad. ASP files, basically, what we do is we build standard HTML up here with our regular tags, table tags, image tags, things of that nature. Well, then what we do is we break out using the begin tag here, the greater than %, we break out a section of code that as the server parses this file, the client requests it, the server the server grabs it and starts parsing it and dumping it into their browser. Well, when the server gets to this point, it says, "Ooh, stop. I'm not giving them this. I'm going to do this myself. This is code for me to run." So it starts running this code. And what that code is so as I don't go blind, better? I'm going to post all of this on the Hammer God website, by the way. So if you don't want to scratch everything down quickly, you'll be able to look at this. What we've done is we've set a connection object. Set con either server.createObject ADODB.connection. Part of the ADODB connection object requires a connection string. We have to know what the data source we're connecting to is, what catalogs we're connecting to, things of that nature. In this case, we're connecting to a SQL Server database. So I'm using the SQL OLEDB. User ID equals SA. Password equals suckafool. Database is the MLS. That stands for Multiple Listing Service in the US. I don't know what you guys call it over around here. And the server ID. This in of itself is bad, right? But it's something that we typically have to do, particularly since we use mixed mode authentication a lot. See this all the time because it's an easy way for the developer to have portable code from web server to web server. Everything you need to connect to this data source exists in this connection string. If I was to use a DSN, a data source, I would have to ensure that that data source lived on every server that might be parsing this code. So, as developers, what we do is just ensure that we have as little overhead as possible with this. Meaning, I can take this ASP code, populate it to a number of different servers, and it's always going to be able to use this to connect. So then, we set a variable called SQL, just a string value. And I say, give me the MLS number, address, city, state, area, type, price, remarks, our listing or not. In the database that we created, I just want to be able to identify if this is my listing or some other guy's listing. So if it's mine, I can make graphics go around it and say, ooh, this one's special, it's mine. Buy this one before you buy this one because I make more money, right? And then notice this part, and this is the bad part. The way that we're creating the resultant SQL string, as you saw, area equal 1. Oh, it's gone. That's the resultant SQL string. Area equal 1. Is that big enough for you back there, the SQL part? Because no? This I might be able to make bigger. Everybody just come on up here. That's basically what the SQL statement says. Okay? We're just assigning area equal 1. We created a resultant string. I was hoping it'd be big enough. And that was done by appending the request form variable of area. So in my form, what we did was say, here's my form. We're going to post to the getDataASP file. I have a variable called area. I'm setting a value to that area variable via this option select object, the drop-down box. Because I think that's kind of secure. I mean, I don't really, right? Me as the developer in this case, I'm thinking, I only want them to be able to choose between 1 and 7. I'm going to do a select box. They can't select anything else. I'm secure. Right? So we just take that string and concatenate it right there on the end. So that resultant string is where area equals 1. So the database goes through, creates a record set object, loops through the record set, and gives me every record. Now, let's say that I as a evil person took this code and saved it to my own drive. Took the user form and just did file save as. Saved it to my own drive. Let me open this guy up. And all I did was make my own form, right? Just go in there, do a form. I'm going to post it to the get data file. And I've created my own field called area. Area equals 1 or 1 equals 1. I'm going to skip one of the files that we did that just had a little logic error in it because it's not necessarily important. But here's what we're doing. Area now, when I post, if I've indeed fixed user form hack 1, I pull this guy up and I submit it. And now we see the logic has changed. Because it says where area equals 1 or 1 equals 1. So everybody who saw the thing that Samuel did yesterday knows, and even if you didn't, I'll explain it anyhow. Using my own client side HTML, I posted the value rather than 1. The value is 1 or 1 equals 1. 1 always equals 1. So in this case, the SQL server parsed this out and said, give me everything where the area equals 1 or where 1 equals 1. So it gave me everything in the database. So now we know here, and see this is a little bit, I like to show you this way because it's a little trickier than your standard, everything is up in the URL and you just get to manipulate it the way that you want. I think that that's pretty easy for a lot of people because it's there in front of you. You see quote number equals 1, 2, 3, 4. So naturally you look at it and go, I wonder what happens if I put quote number 1, 2, 3, 5. See if it gives you somebody else's quote or something like that. This is a little bit different because I think the constraints that are placed on the form make you think that it's secure. Now that we can do this, we're going to take a look at a way that we can do something a little bit nastier. Because what I've done is posted that up there. The other neat thing about doing it this way when you find forms is that in the logs, you don't see URLs with blatant manipulative text in it. Meaning, when you go back through your IIS logs and you're looking at what people have done and you're looking through the posts and gets and all of that stuff, where you see quote number equal percent, 255, OUF, or anything like that, people are throwing junk in there, it's very obvious to you. It's like, whoa, who's doing that? Well, the URL stays the same. We're posting it all in under the request form. So if I wanted to think a little bit more about hacking on this application, what we can see, same thing, I'm posting the get data to. I know you're not going to be able to see this, so I'll just kind of tell you what we've done. We know that I'm executing a record set, right? We can see that because it's giving me data back. What we can attempt to do, since all I've done is taken SQL text and concatenated the value on the end of it, what we can attempt to do is change the logic of the statement even more. I'll leave my value 1 or 1 equals 1, but now I'm going to throw a union select statement on the back end of it. The regular uses for union select are where I say, give me, let's say I have 2 tables containing data. Product number, item number, price, quantity. Over here, same kind of stuff over here in a different table. For whatever reason, maybe you have different, That's not the smartest way to do it, but let's just, for now, say you've got the two tables. What the union select allows you to do is you say, select 1, 2, 3, 4 from this table, union select 1, 2, 3, 4 from this table, and then it gives you this record set and this record set right behind it. It streams both record sets together. So I know that this thing is giving me some data objects. Now, union select is a little tricky. It's already 3. Union select is a little tricky because the records requested in this set have to match this set. If I have a select statement with 5 columns here, my union select statement also has to have 5 columns. Even worse, the data types have to match. So if I've selected name, quantity, price, over here, I can't select name, price, quantity over here because the integer value of quantity, unless you have floating decimal for like point fractional pieces of a product, won't match up to the money value of the select statement, right? You want me to show you that in detail, or you just trust me? Thank you. So what we can do is, through trial and error, what's going to happen, let me at least show you this. I took 1 out. I took of my statement. I'm kind of telling that to remind myself, okay? When I submit this form, can I just preview and submit? Is that going to work? No, that's not going to work. That one's called User Hack 2. When I submit this error, the SQL server comes back to me, or the web server comes back to me, and gives me some really detailed error messages. Now is probably as good a time as any to talk about configuring your web servers properly. As developers, we turn on extended error reporting. Know that by default, IIS turns on ODBC error reporting itself. Okay? Just by default. When you install IIS, error reporting is turned on. What I've done as a developer is gone into IIS and told it to change the error message that I get from an internal server error to a different ASP page that gives me this really rich error content. So as a developer, I can come over and go, okay, now what am I doing? You see the post data, you see all of that. Even if that wasn't there, even if I, as a developer, did not go through and specifically request this extended data, by default, IIS would tell me all I need to know in this case, which is the error itself, saying all queries must contain a union operator. These error messages are very, very helpful to me as an intruder in mapping out your database structure. Because all I have to do is do a union select, because I don't know the ASP side, right? All I know is you're returning some record sets. So the first thing I'm going to do is inject my SQL code and say, well, 1 equals 1, union select variable. Run it, I get this error message. Union select variable, variable. Get this error message. Keep doing that. Because I know I'm not going to have like 1,000 columns in my select statement. Maybe 15, maybe 20. In this case, there's 9. What happened? Yeah, I did the preview. Let me open this back up again. Clear so far about what we're talking about? Yeah? So I did it. Yeah? So let me show you a little bit, just a quick. Yep. So I'm going to go back in, I'm going to modify the value that I'm giving to this variable. Now what's the first thing? The first thing I pull up is MLS. In this example, I'm using my knowledge of the application to show you the error, but the only reason I'm doing that is to save a little bit of time. As you'll see here in just a second, I would be able to determine this just through some little bit of patience on my side on this guy. Was that even legible speech? Oh, it worked anyway. Shouldn't have done that. Well, here's what we've done. I kind of shot myself in the foot. I'm too good of a hacker. What we've done is created a SQL statement that not only retrieves the MLS number, address, city, state, area, price, remarks, blah, 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 but I have a union statement where I'm taking advantage of some functionality that SQL Server gave me. Remember earlier I said if you have a monetary value here on the other side of the union statement, you have to have a monetary value in the same column? That would make us have to do more work in the past, because once I figure out how many columns I'm unioning, and I just go union select, text, comma, text, comma, text, comma, until I match it up, the error message would change. It would have then said, cannot convert type integer to type text. And it would tell me in that error message that the variable declaration type, the type of those variables. So then I'd have to go through that 9 more times and then put the appropriate value types in my select statement so they match up. SQL Server 2000 has introduced a variant object, a type variant, so that all I have to do now is tell it to insert a variant object instead of the explicit data type, and it converts it for me. Which is great from a development standpoint, but for union selects where I'm trying to take advantage of this stuff, I mean, it just makes my job as a hacker that much easier. So we created a SQL statement where I say, give me this, 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 and name from sys objects in the master database. So in one simple, well, it became simple, statement, we changed the logic of the application to not just give us the homes in Lake Tahoe, but to give us all the homes in the database and to tell me the name of every object on the server over here. SP attach, SP change subscriptions. This tells me every stored procedure, every table, every database, every object from this from this database, not from the server, because I pulled it up from this database. Every object in this database is now displayed for me. This is excellent information to have if I'm footprinting your application, right? So in one statement, what we've done is return this. If I was being malicious, I wouldn't have gone through this trouble. You see something like this and say you're pissed at them for something. They shipped you the wrong sneakers and won't give you your money back. I'm not in any way, shape, or form condoning this. I don't do this. But it's you do something like this, and rather than union select blah, 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 semicolon, drop database MLS. And it's gone. You saw earlier that I had a connection string that identified me as the SA. Every query I submit to this form is executed in the context of the SA, which on a Windows 2000 box is going to be the credentials of the SQL Server service. By default, when you go to install that guy, it says use local system account. Not only am I making calls to the SQL Server super user, and I hate that word, but that's what he is, I have the ability of making calls to the operating system as local system. I could have just as easily done an XP command shell and added myself in the administrators group. No longer, and this is the application itself is using the anonymous user assigned to it in IIS. This one account. But since I have initiated a connection to the data source under SA, that connection is privileged. So I can do anything SQL can do. Unfortunately, SQL can do anything the local system can do typically. It takes a little bit more work to configure SQL Server as a non-privileged account. It can absolutely be done. It's actually kind of easy if you think about it beforehand. Create a guest user in the domain that is not a member of anything else. And when you go to install SQL Server, tell it to use a domain account, and it will verify during the installation process that that account has the rights on the SQL box itself to perform the functions of a SQL Server. So as if I do things like this, and I do get in, the things that I'm doing, if I exit out of the process, are being done in limited context. So I can't run XP command shell. Stuff like that. I can run XP command shell, but once I do that, depending on the mode, we get a little sticky here, but once I do that, I really don't get anywhere. So, we can drop tables. We can issue SQL send mail commands. That's also a nice way. The demo yesterday was showing you one-way hacking. Well, typically there's going to be a lot of other ports open. But even if they've closed down everything really tight, you know a company has mail going out. So if I get in here, want to configure a mail account, if it's already configured on the SQL box, I can use, say, the XP send mail, package up a query and send it out to a Hotmail account. Select splat from credit card numbers, attach equal yes, bang. The SQL Server will package up that query, attach it into a file, and send it out the email server to me. So there's really some mean and nasty things that you can do if you take your time. IDS doesn't pick this up. Firewalls don't stop this. This is all legitimate HTTP traffic. In fact, we've asked people to come to our website and look for this. I mean, that's what we've done. So let's take a look at, when is the first break? I know this is a stupid question, but anyone? Anyone? Bueller? Anyone? It's an American joke. It's Ferris Bueller, Ben Stein. Thank you. So that's at 3:30. Great. Thanks a lot. All right, so let's just take a look at some ways of, I guess it's time to move on to the next slide. It's not going to be this slow. Okay. So now let's look at some ways that we can keep this from happening. So I'm going to go back to get data. Remember what get data was doing was taking the form input and concatenating it directly on the back end of this SQL query in order to produce the resultant SQL string. So let's look at get data. I'm going to skip get data 2 and move right on to get data 3. Sorry. Now, in Get Data 3, we've started to wise up a little bit, but not too much. Where the real issues with SQL injection come in is that I am taking X input, changing it to meet my own SQL strings, and then passing that on to the application. You'll notice that I've been using integer values for this, right? Those are the easiest to inject SQL in because I don't have to mess around with the quote structure. Because typically I know that there's no ending quote. However, let me point this out. If what you have done is given them a search form, and I'm typing in the word bicycle, and I hit enter, you've taken the SQL query will actually insert the quotes for me, right? I'll say select splat from products. I won't say splat. Select X number of columns from products where begin quote or where product type equal begin single quote, request form area or request form variable, and single quote, so that it types it all up for me. Whenever I'm injecting stuff, I'm going to have to deal with that. So when I say this equals this and this equals this, I may have to throw a single quote in there to have it parsed properly. The long and short of it is that the incoming variable needs to be stripped of potentially dangerous characters. Single quotes, double dashes. What a double dash will do is even if I've structured a SQL statement to say, give me this and this and this, where this equals this, and this equals this, or this, and I have this logic on the right side of that statement. If I inject a double dash into it, it terminates the statement. So even though you as a developer or I as a developer could have some qualifying where clauses on the back end and group bys and things that might mitigate potential injection, if I was to put in a double dash, it would remark out the rest of that line and the SQL engine won't even parse it. So single quotes are bad, double quotes are probably bad, depending on how you have it set up. So what we've done in this case is the ASP object has given me the capability, or the scripting engine has an object called regexp, R-E-G-E-X-P. It stands for regular expression, and it's actually a very powerful little object. I instantiate a expression object, and then what I do is give that object a pattern. I can say that this object is going to be have a pattern of only digits 0 through 9. And I can do that in this case with a /D. You look in on the website, Microsoft website under the scripting technologies, has a huge list of all the different types of patterns that you can give it. And not just pre-stored patterns like all text or all numbers, but you can put your own custom strings in there looking for bin Laden, looking for anything that you want from a custom standpoint. So once the pattern has been set here, you can then take a variable, iArea, and say that this variable equals the replace method of the expression, and then pump in your input variable here. What this ends up saying is take my input variable area, and anytime you see something that is not a digit, replace it with a null character. Strip it right out of there. So that even if, this is get data 3, so that even if I try to dump this form hack in where I had the union select statement, let's set him to post to get data 3, I think. Yeah. You know, I meant to change that. Kind of stepped out of my planned script. That generated an error somewhere else just because of the way that I was typing it. Typing, not typing, typing the data type. But the long and short of it is that once I strip out all of those characters, all that would be left in that case would have been some long number. Because there were valid digits in that statement, right? Select where area equals 1, or 1 equals 1, union select, all these with converts of zeros and all of that. So I think we figured out in class it was like a 1 billion or something. It would have stuck that in there. And to a degree, though we couldn't execute the union select statement, I was still able to change the logic, right? Because what was happening there in that union select statement, even though I pattern it out, I still end up with this 1 million some odd number. So though we have sanitized the input, stripping out quotes, stripping out text, stripping out anything that we know is bad. And you can let all text in but no single quotes, or no double quotes, or a string of different variables that you're going to search for. So though we've sanitized it, we still need to validate it. We need to check the value and the length. Now really in this case, so what? They injected something in there that changed it from a area equals 1 to area equals 1 billion. I don't have an area equals 1 billion, so if I didn't have that hack statement up in there, let me show you what get user input would really do. User form 3. Truckee. And anything between 1 and 3 mil. That's really what user input 3 will do. It's going to strip out everything and still make sure that my result in SQL statement is fine. So even in this case, if I did inject something in there that said area equals 1 billion, it would still not have any records. But that's still kind of bad. Because really, even though, I just danced over a couple things. So in checking the extents, what we've done is I've stripped all the possible garbage out of the input strings. I then qualify the data and say, if the area is greater than 6, then the area equals 0. Explicitly say, I don't care what they have done. Make it this. Same with price and type and sort, and that way people can't just start interjecting garbage into my application. See, and I may have done something stupid along the way, and they may get more information out of it. So we explicitly type this data. And here what I've done is something that's kind of bad but maybe necessary in some cases, is rather than taking their strings and appending it to the end of my SQL statement, I'm going to take their strings, convert them to values, sanitize those values, check the extents of them, and then convert them back to my own strings. So I say, strip the data. If area is greater than 6, it's 0. Now I know that I've really limited what area can be at this point in the code, right? So I create strings that say and area equals this and area equals that. The real reason for creating these strings is like price. Area is equal, right? I mean, area is easy because it's an equals. Give me everything where area equal 1. Okay. But with price, it's different. I have all these different prices, and I've given them the ability to search for prices between certain ranges. So that means that I have to, before I pass anything onto my SQL server, I've got to come up with some logic that's going to allow me to do that. So I create these betweens, where price is between this and between that. However, we've still got an issue, because at the end of the day, I'm still taking these resultant strings and passing just string ad hoc variables into my SQL server. And the reason that that's bad is because if I breach this application somewhere, and I know that that SQL server is accepting just text data, I still might be able to futz around with things. So we've got it pretty tight. But wherever possible, we've done that. Wherever possible, we want to set up a structure where we just don't dump an ad hoc query into the server, but we create parameters. We create a procedure with typed parameters, create that structure, assign variables to it inside of that structure, and then pass along the commands. Sometimes it's necessary, right? Like if you have a form that allows people to search, really a robust form that they can search for this or this, where this is this or this is this, and you really give them a lot of options, the resultant logic that you have to create is kind of complex, because you have to go through and say, okay, give me all the homes where there's a 1 or they have between 2 and 3 baths, and the price is between this and it's a residence. So you kind of have to concatenate all these strings together to produce the resultant logic. But where at all possible, I keep doing that. Where at all possible, we want to introduce as much structure as we can. So now I'm going to further change things some. This is get data 4. And what get data 4 does is it still does the standard sanitation, validation, extents checking that we did previously. But I'm going to, rather than just saying, here's a SQL string, server, execute it, we're going to say, okay, SQL Server, I'm about to give you an ad hoc query. And I'm going to type this query in a particular way so that you're only going to accept the input that I want you to accept. Now we're talking to SQL Server. What we've been doing up to this point is kind of validating everything on the client side. I'm sorry, on the web server side. We've been packaging it up and we're checking it and we're putting in extents and we're making sure it's all nice and clean. And then once we do that, we just dump the SQL query into the SQL Server. To the server, that's actually an expensive operation. Because for the most part, SQL Server has to figure out what the best way of getting me that information is. All right, so it's secure for the most part. But now we have performance issues that we might want to address, right? So I dump in a SQL statement that says select this from this, blah, 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 blah. It has to go through and find the best path of optimization. It's got to optimize that query first, then get the results for me. I'm going to use execute SQL. Execute SQL is a stored procedure inside of SQL Server that allows you to dump in ad hoc queries, but has the added benefit of optimizing it a little bit more. And the reason it can optimize it is because it knows a particular structure. So let's look at this just for a second. The SQL statement is execute, SP execute SQL. I specifically type it off in quote, here's my string. But notice this time I say area equals at area. That at area now is going to be a declared SQL Server variable that I do right here. I say area equals an integer. So now SQL even knows. Hey, how you doing? SQL even knows that it's about to get an integer value for area and it's not going to accept anything else. That's a good thing. So not only on the web side have we sanitized stuff, now we're letting SQL know exactly how to handle this data. And since it knows how to handle it, and we have some where logic here, it's going to be able to give us a better all-around optimized query. And then you see I take area equals and I dump in my I area. So we're getting there. Yeah? Any questions so far on this? We got about 5 minutes. I'm going to whip through. I might keep you just a couple of minutes over the break. Anyway. Any questions about this specifically before I show you kind of like the last one? Anyone? Anyone? What we really want to end up at is best practices of sanitizing our data coming in from the web application, as well as best practices of designing our back-end data solution from a structure standpoint. From the SQL Server standpoint, the use of stored procedures is a much better way of doing this. I didn't use a stored procedure. Well, I used a SQL stored procedure that allows me to dump ad hoc queries into it. What we're going to do now, let me just show you a little bit about what the back-end data looks like. I'm doing it in Access, yet this is a SQL database over here. This is a project file. So it's accessing the data on the SQL Server. And here's my listings, by the way. This is the raw data, where it has the MLS number, address, city, state, zip, stuff like that. And you can see how it's typed out here. integer values, varchars, variable character lengths, money, and some bit flags. What we can do on the SQL side, and let's just for a minute step outside of the web app portion of it. What we can do on the SQL side is create a pre-stored procedure where I put in my SQL statement, give it some variable information, and I'm going to store this guy. Well, what happens is he gets pre-optimized. So we get some performance benefits here too. Much better performance benefits than the ad hoc query where I typed it, where I said area equals int. So basically all this procedure does is it's very simple, is it's going to take an input parameter called @area_int. So this procedure will be declared as input variant as select my stuff where the area equals @area. Well, where the area, where this equals whatever I pump into it here. It's kind of nice to be tall. So let's just execute this. This is all on the SQL side. Area equals 1. Boom. There's all of my data. Area equals foo. SQL won't let me go any further now because it knows. No magic here, but it's a very important step. It's real easy as developers for us to try to do everything in strings. But let's take the time and create stored procedures that have some strong typing on them. Now let's look at our last little example before the break, which is get data 5. Same thing's going to be going on here. Right? I still strip out my data. In some of these cases, I wouldn't necessarily have to strip out my data. Like with the execute SQL, it knows it's an integer value. I don't necessarily have to do it, right? Because it's not going to take a string. The execute SQL statement in of itself kind of helps me out a little bit. But we're going to do it anyway. Always validate the data before anything else happens. This is security kind of in depth, development security in depth, if you will. So I set my regular expressions. I rimmed out these because we were playing with something in the class. But that's not what's important. And I'm going to use another new object here. It's called the command object. It's a scripting object available for us in VB that allows you to create an object specifically for the passing of ADODB commands to an ADODB connection. So what we do here is I still set my connection string, and that's wrong. At this point in the game, really what we would have done is we would have gone back, switched to NT-only mode, created the trusted connection between the INET user account and the public role or something of those lines, gone through and changed our permissions on the SQL server, things of that nature. The only thing that would have been up here would have been maybe the DSN name or the server name and the database name, and trusted connection equals true. And then if they get into it, it's no big deal. Speaking of which, let me just show you this real quick before I go on. I know, I said real quick. People normally never see our ASP code, right? because it's all client side. They'd have to already break something to get hold of the ASP code to, ooh, it's gone, to leverage any information gained by that connection statement. A couple of weeks ago, somebody who was a Microsoft certified partner, as per the new instructions that they must have a Passport account in order to continue to be a certified partner and to log on to the certified partner website, they were going around and trying to change their password. They hit enter, and right from Microsoft's secure servers pop up the source code for the back-end application. This is the actual code. You see every single thing here. Now let me show you this. This is Microsoft. This is the development. This is the secure site for people who pay money to be partners. User ID equals MCSP user, password equals MCSP data, database and server. It's done all the time, even by the people who are supposed to know what they're doing. Rather than using a trusted connection, they also have it set up as mixed mode. And what I also thought was a little bit funny.
Is mixed mode default? Is that
No, in 2000, it's Windows only is the default now, but people just go and switch it for this very reason. And where did they have the?
Does it really make a difference because it's probably not an account that it's in?
We don't know that, but what we do know is that it is in mixed mode.
But does it's exactly the same because if you have a trusted connection, you just use your IMSR, it's probably going to have the same properties.
Well, but with a trusted connection, I have to be logged on as the user who's going to be mapped over to gain access to that data. Well, but wait, what I can do with this, just the knowledge that they're in mixed mode is going to allow me to brute force this server against the SA password. They probably haven't done if they've done this, logic might dictate to me that the SA password might be weak. Particularly when I see structure like this. The MCSP username is MCSP user. And the MCSP password is MCSP data. So we can kind of guess that they're not thinking security when they're designing the server here. It's probably on the inside. This isn't the end of the world, you're right. But I'm a lot further along than I ever was to begin with, just from this information here. And just to throw a jab at them, because I can, even though I'm fans of theirs, this is nice. The password is porn online. Come on. How cheap is that? Okay. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about how far we can get with stuff like that, because it'll be a little bit more appropriate in the second half. So real quick, this connection string would be blown out of here in our end result product. And what we're going to do is, I'm going to say, rather than select execute the SQL like I've been doing all day, I now set the command object's active connection to my regular connection string created up here, which would be in a trusted connection. And right here, I'm going to create a parameter called area. First, remember that stored procedure we did called getArea? That's where I put it. I say, the command text that you're going to execute is getArea. The command type is 4, which is the integer representation of a stored procedure in the command objects method. The command create parameter area specifically creates the name area, types it as an integer, and assigns the value of 1. Well, what I'd really do is put I area up in there. I was just in a hurry. And then I append the area1 object, which is the create parameter, to the parameters method of the command object. I know that sounds kind of sticky, but it's really pretty easy to do, and this makes the code kind of portable. So as you don't have to continually wonder how you're going to be building these query strings. Now when we do this, we are appreciating the best of like all three worlds that we've talked about so far. We've sanitized the data, we've done extents checking to make sure it's not between this and this. We have gone to our SQL server and created actual stored procedures that we're going to use to retrieve this data with strong typing of the parameters there. We've come over here and we've created objects that have also strong typing. I mean, we are explicitly saying what you can put in these objects, even after they've been cleansed. And then all we do is execute the command. Command execute, bang. And it's just going to return that other data set for us. But this is where we want to end up. We want to end up with our development being cleansed and all of this good stuff while taking advantage of all of the stuff that we have. And it's really not that hard to do. So at the end of the day, not only are we really secure, we're optimized, and our clients are happy with us because we have a secure site, we're doing everything right, and it's good and fast. Okay. I'll do that real quick. So let's take our, ooh, you're not back. Don't look at that. So let's take our quick break. 15 or 20. I guess we can get started right at 4 then. So let's go ahead and take a 20-minute break since I kept you over 10 minutes. And I'm going to have some water.